Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, yes, thank you for your question. Well, the case was brought against Germany for its assistance in abetting what is happening in Palestine, what Israel is doing in Palestine. As everybody knows, there is a case already against Israel that was brought by South Africa. Those are for the crimes directly committed by Israel. The crimes claimed by South Africa are only based on the Genocide Convention, because that is the only basis of jurisdiction against Israel, because Israel doesn't recognize the jurisdiction on any other convention. So the only crime that they can be accused of is the crime of genocide. Now, faced with that situation, and to speak, let's say, on a personal level, for me, it was quite impressive after the case was brought by South Africa. And in the first days of January of this year, of course, immediately, the first country to react was Germany and say, we are going to intervene in the case in favor of Israel. And then you had interviews with law professors, with very important people. And the impression was, well, you know, the genocide is very difficult to prove. So the impression in the public listening to all that was, well, there's doubt if Israel is doing something wrong. There's no doubt, absolutely no doubt. Israel is committing all the crimes in humanity in the international humanitarian law. The only reason is that South Africa or no country can go against Israel only on the basis of Genocide Convention. So after hearing that, Nicaragua wanted to assist as much as possible for the Palestinian people. And we have experience in the court. I mean, we are not discovering the International Court of Justice. We had a case against the United States 40 years ago, which changed, including the history of the court itself. The court has changed. It has become used by many countries after the Nicaragua case. We have had more cases than practically most countries in the world, with the exception perhaps of the United States. We've had 15 cases in my time in the court. I mean, just about as much as France and the UK, and a little bit less than the United States. So it's not that we are discovering the court and doing something special. I mean, we know the court. It's one of the things we know about it, our litigation in the court. It's one of the things in which we could help the Palestinian people. So where could our help reside? According to the conventions, including the Genocide Convention, but also the international humanitarian laws, the Conventions of Geneva of 1949, and its protocols, and all customary international law relating to the peremptory norms, those legal norms that cannot be avoided or contradicted or go against all principles of humanity, like slavery, like apartheid, like genocide. All those are precisely norms of peremptory international law. And we have absolutely open jurisdiction, total jurisdiction against several countries that accept jurisdiction of the court on all bases. One of them is Germany. Obviously, the principal supplier and abettor of what is happening in Israel is the United States. But we don't have any jurisdiction against the United States to bring it to the International Court. The United States was very careful because the United States was one of the last to become a party to the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention is from 1948. The United States became a party in 1988, 40 years later, and with a lot of reservations that make it impossible to bring it to the court or do anything. So is that possible? Not feasible to bring the United States to a court. So the next possibility was the second principal supplier of weapons to Israel, which is Germany. And why do we go against Germany? Because all these conventions have the obligation of prevention. The Genocide Convention, for example, says that all countries have the obligation to prevent and punish genocide. If you have the obligation to prevent, it doesn't mean that a genocide has already to have been completed and that a court of justice has to say, well, a genocide has already been done and period. No, you have an obligation to prevent it. And when does that obligation arise? The only logical way is it arises when you are aware of what is happening. And Germany, as we told it in court very clearly in our application, Germany has been aware of this from the first few days that this started. The Secretary General of the United Nations said it on the 9th of October. The President of the Red Cross, all the authorities, we presented a document of hundreds and thousands of people who have been saying this, authorities saying that genocide, international humanitarian law is being violated. So Germany had the obligation to stop selling weapons and stop abetting Israel. So that is why we are claiming it against Germany. Not because Germany directly is killing the people or massacring the people in Palestine, but the bullets that they are supplying, the tanks and the airplanes that they are preparing are the ones that are killing. So that is, let's say, the background to the case we have in the court. And if you allow me a few seconds more, 1 minute, the importance of this case, unfortunately, it's difficult to even say, or very, I can't even find the words to say it appropriately, but because there's nothing that goes beyond the horror that's happening there. But the importance of this case also goes beyond the present circumstances. It is that there's an obligation, international obligation, the international community has the obligation to help prevent these horrors. It's happening in Palestine now, that's happened in the past, in the recent past in other areas in the world. And things are not done. Countries have an obligation to do something. So that's why this case is very important, not only because of the immediate effect we hope it will have, because if the court accepts Nicaragua's request and orders Germany to stop aiding and abetting Israel, then this will be a message to the international community, a very clear message. And hopefully the result will be something like what happened in South Africa, when finally the world was convinced that the only way to finish with the apartheid regime and the horrors that were happening in South Africa was to stop aiding and abetting the white apartheid regime there. Well, that simply fell off. That simply fell down and finished. So our hope also, if countries stop aiding and abetting Israel, the same thing will happen, and a solution will finally come to that very sad part of the world. That, let's say, is a summary of our position.
On Monday, when you made your presentation and when your team made the presentation, you had sort of anticipated two defenses that Germany would raise the following day. I guess maybe they suggested those in pleadings or somewhere else in the record. One that was that there was no genocide, and two, if there was, they weren't aware of it. I think those were the two. Yesterday, they, in fact, presented their defense. Could you give us a very quick, your take on what you heard yesterday?
Well, I mean, most of the thrust of the presentation yesterday by Germany was first to say that they were helping the Palestinian people, that they had not stopped the help to the Palestinian people. Although they could not deny that they have stopped the aid to UNRWA, to the refugee organization of the United Nations. They stopped the help for operations in Gaza, which is precisely where the famine is going to happen. So I mean, they can start giving money all around the world, but that doesn't change the situation that they stopped the funding for the Gaza. But they went around explaining largely all the funds that they are giving all over in all their preoccupation, that they are dropping aid in air by air to the poor Gazans. I mean, which frankly, it's cynical to be saying, yes, we are dropping food by air, but we are selling guns. I mean, it's incredible. And then they were trying to minimize the amount of weapons that they are selling to Israel. And let me make a point to that, because I mentioned in my speech on Monday, day before yesterday, and just as an example, I mean, because we mentioned other examples, that in November of last year, 2 months, November 23, I think last year, just 2 months after everything began, there was a great ceremony in Berlin because Israel had sold $3.6 billion in weapons to Germany, not Germany to Israel, Israel to Germany. And they were celebrating that 2 months. So when we're talking about the amount of weapons being interchanged there, well, they went around well, that they had increased 5 million or 10 million or whatever. I mean, if you're talking about a country like Israel, which is in the top 10% of the most powerful countries in the world, it probably by size is probably the most powerful country in the world. The expense, the military expense, as I pointed out, is I think 16 billion a year, which is higher than its neighbors. Egypt, which has a population 20 times bigger and a territory 50 times larger, has less of a budget. Iran, with a population more than 10 times larger than that, the military budget of Iran is lower. So when we're talking about Israel, you're talking about that Germany is the second supplier of weapons. We're not talking about a few $1 million because obviously that's irrelevant for that. I mean, if you're talking about a poor country like Nicaragua, a couple of $1 million would be a great advantage for the army or the defenses in Nicaragua. But in Israel, that is irrelevant. We're talking about a great deal of money. And we also emphasize that it's also a big business in Germany. It's not only a great preoccupation for supposedly the Jewish people, which I mentioned and I specified it distinctly that they should make a very clear distinction that if they feel, and they constantly emphasize it, that they feel empathy because of what happened in Germany during the Nazi period to help the Jewish people. I told them, I mean, the Jewish people is not Israel. Israel is a state that does not represent the Jewish sentiments. If you want to help the Jewish people, do it some other way. But anyway, they emphasized the help they were giving, minimizing the amount of military expense. And then on the legal point, they made what was an obvious argument, which is that they can't be that no decision can be made on their on the question of the crimes being committed because Israel is not a party to the case, and that they can't be convicted, let's say, for helping while nobody has yet convicted Israel officially that a crime has been committed. I mean, that is not, it is a legal point, but it's not the first time that has come up. We are not questioning that Germany directly is committing the crimes. I mean, it is, but they are responsible. They have a responsibility independent of that. Just as soon as they have knowledge that a genocide might be in course, not even having terminated or committed completely, they have the obligation to prevent it from happening. So that's what we are. Anyway, those are more or less the arguments. With the way the court is handling the situation, I mean, the situation was that we presented our application, which is our explanation, our original 60-page document. Germany had a copy for over a month of that. Then we went first yesterday, the day before yesterday, we presented our case. And up to that moment when we spoke, we had not heard a single word on the legal issues from Germany. It was until yesterday. So in fact, it leaves us in a bit in a difficult situation because we didn't have the opportunity to respond directly to them. Although we could anticipate some of the arguments, obviously we did, but we had no opportunity to respond directly. So your opportunity you give me now is an opportunity, let's say, to respond outside of court to what we should have been able to do very happily the day after.
Yeah, it's a tactic in litigation that some people refer to as sandbagging, when you hold back your papers to the last moment to try to minimize the amount of time the other side has to consider and respond to them. Can I just one last point? You've had the opportunity to see the court operate for a very long time. Back in January, when they issued their opinion regarding the case brought by South Africa, one of the pieces of relief that South Africa sought was to have Israel stop interfering with the delivery of aid. And in fact, the court, after finding, by the way, there was a probability that genocide had occurred, directed Israel to not interfere and to affirmatively enable the delivery of aid. And that was one day before Germany and the United States cut off funding to the principal agent of aid, UNRWA. How do you think the court is going to treat what looks like an insult, basically, to its order?
Well, hopefully they'll really act upon it. And frankly, this gives them the opportunity of doing it with the case with Germany, because before Germany was not before the court, it was only South Africa against Israel. But the point you're mentioning is frankly something that was very shocking, and I emphasized it in my presentation and the day we spoke. And I made the comparison, which is obvious when you think about it. You have, apart from the cynicism of making this accusation one day after the court gave the order, which of course, as you pointed out, is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's just a school making fun of the court. But from the point of view of the other countries, of Germany, of the United States, of all the other countries, they acted on the sole statement of Germany, of Israel, saying that certain 6 or a dozen persons from this organization supposedly had participated in the events of 7 October that began the attacks on that going on in effect. Now, this to this day has not been proven, apart from the fact that even 12 individuals out of 12,000 or 15,000, I don't know how many, but it's more than 12,000 workers and staff people in UNRWA working in that area. We're talking about a ridiculous amount. We're not going to end, even if it was entirely proven, it wasn't proven, it was just the word of Israel. And at that moment, as you mentioned, immediately they suspended the aid. So one of the questions I asked them in the court is, on the sole say-so of Israel, you suspended the aid. But you have been listening from the Secretary General of the United Nations to everybody that a genocide is going on, and you haven't stopped the aid to Israel. So I mean, how cynical can you get? I mean, what are you talking about? That you are imposing sanctions? Who are you imposing sanctions? And that's the problem with the sanctions also. I mean, the sanctions are simply a political decision. They try to say we are based on international law, we are defending international law. No, they are political decisions. Like this, it's incredible. I mean, it's so evident. It's incredible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much for your time.